The Shroud of Turin, shrouded in mystery and revered as one of the most enigmatic artifacts in Christian history, is poised to reveal new secrets. Envision a cloth that bears the marks of a man crucified in a manner strikingly similar to the biblical descriptions of Jesus, pierced on the right side, eyes covered with coins minted under Pontius Pilate, and dusted with pollen from the streets of Jerusalem. This same cloth shares mysterious bloodstains with the Sudarium of Oviedo, purportedly also linked to Jesus, and features an inexplicable burst of ultraviolet radiation that has etched a three-dimensional image of this tormented figure into its fibers. Long dismissed as a medieval hoax, recent evidence may force us to reconsider its authenticity. Are we looking at a genuine relic of miraculous origins? Watch to the end as we explore the compelling, unfolding story of the Shroud of Turin. The ongoing debate about the Shroud of Turin seems never-ending. Interest in this sacred piece of cloth fluctuates, but what exactly is it? Some within the Roman Catholic Church argue that it's the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, said to bear his supernatural image from head to feet, serving as evidence of his death and resurrection. Non-Catholics have also shown interest in the shroud, hoping for tangible proof to support their faith. The special cloth called a shroud has been kept in different churches since at least the 14th century, maybe even longer. It's in the town of Turin in Italy, which is why it's called the Turin Shroud. But if you wrap a cloth around a person, it usually doesn't show a clear picture of their body and face, right? Well, this is where it starts to get really interesting. Those who think the shroud is real suggest that when Christ came back to life, some kind of special energy from his body made a supernatural picture on the cloth. Pope Paul VI and Pope Sixtus IV have both expressed significant reverence for the relic. The cloth, approximately 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide, first appeared in the mid-14th century. However, a French Catholic bishop, Pierre Darcy, quickly labeled it a forgery. It is indeed peculiar that there is no historical record of this remarkable burial cloth until over 1,000 years after Christ's death. The absence of any claim by the early disciples regarding this cloth with the image of Theomarster is also noteworthy. Now, did you know that back in 1988, a team of global scientists conducted radiocarbon dating on fragments of the Shroud of Turin, a cloth believed by some to be associated with Christ's crucifixion? Surprisingly, the result indicated that the shroud likely originated between 1260 and 1390 AD, challenging its supposed connection to the 1st century AD. How could this belong to Jesus if it was more than 1,000 years younger than Jesus? Well, you may want to pay close attention to this next part. Shroud experts and investigators have questioned the accuracy of the dating, suggesting potential issues with contamination during testing. Microbiologist Professor Stephen J. Mattingly from the University of Texas even proposes that bacteria, not fire, might have influenced the carbon-14 dating results. The underlying science of radiocarbon dating is quite simple. Carbon, in the form of carbon-14, is naturally produced in the atmosphere and incorporated into living organisms. However, once an organism dies, it no longer takes in carbon-14, allowing scientists to estimate its age by measuring the remaining carbon-14. Mattingly argues that bacteria contamination on the shroud, which has come into contact with various species over centuries, could deter the dating results. He and his colleague have identified different bacteria on the shroud, including some that produce a peculiar material potentially helping preserve the cloth. Interestingly, Mattingly suggests that bacteria might be responsible for the shroud's image. As the theory goes, bacteria in the wounds of the crucified man, forming a biofilm, could have left a faint imprint on the cloth, gradually darkening over time. To support this idea, Mattingly conducts experiments using bacteria of his own skin, producing a biofilm and transferring it onto a linen cloth. The result is a photograph-like image, indicating the possible link between bacteria, biofilm, and the mysterious shroud image. Ongoing experiments aim to isolate the compounds responsible for the observed color and enhance the quality of facial images. The proof supporting the Shroud of Turin being real is very strong. It's hard to think anyone with an open mind would see it as anything less than convincing. Even though many think research on the shroud ended with a carbon dating in 1988, did you know that it's actually been studied more than any other single object in history? And this is where things get really shocking. The main idea is that scientists proving the image on the cloth is impossible to copy. One reason is that, as scientists now confirmed, the image on the shroud had to happen because of a strange burst of light, electromagnetic radiation. It was so powerful that it could even light up a whole stadium. In short, the proof shows the shroud was wrapped around a real body that just disappeared without ruining the perfectly shaped blood clots on the cloth. This could only happen through an event like the one described in the Gospels as the resurrection. The event that, as the Gospels say, freed Jesus' body from normal limits. The only proof that challenged the shroud's truth, the carbon dating, has now been proven wrong. New data from the carbon tests, released after 29 years, shows the tests were not for sure at all. Historical research also shows the shroud existed long before the carbon date that put it in the Middle Ages. Now, did you know that new dating tests have even dated the cloth to the 1st century? So the only thing that seemed to say the shroud wasn't real doesn't make sense anymore. 4 research papers written by 12 experts have been published in serious academic journals. They all agree the carbon dating was wrong and ask for new carbon dating to be done. Many shroud researchers, including nuclear engineer Robert A. Rucker and journalist Philip Ball, support this idea. But the Church should not hurry into more carbon-14 tests for a few reasons. One reason is that carbon dating the shroud will never be for sure because the cloth is dirty and because the tests would only ruin it further. When carbon dating was first suggested, a group of scientists said 7 samples from different parts of the cloth were needed for it to be believable. But the carbon daters only took 1 sample and broke it into 3 pieces. Why would the Church agree to ruin more of the cloth now, taking 7 more samples, especially when the latest proof shows the shroud has been made dirty by carbon-14? And why do it when the proof that the shroud is real is stronger than ever? Well, let's take a look at some of the most important tests, and this is where it gets even more interesting. So one of these tests, wide-angle X-ray scattering, recently dated the shroud to the 1st century. The results came out just last year from a team led by Dr. Liberto De Caro from Italy's National Research Council. The test doesn't ruin the cloth, and you can repeat it many times with just 1 sample. 3 other dating tests by Professor Giulifanti and others at the University of Padua also confirm the 1st century date. So why would the Church rush into more carbon dating of the shroud? Some researchers say the proof for the shroud being real is so strong that more dating isn't needed. The proof we now have shows that the image on the 4-meter-long cloth is an impossible image, something that can only be explained as a supernatural event. The image on the shroud has never been copied by science because the proof shows it can't be. It's a very detailed, photonegative 3D image made by a change in tiny linen fibers. This change could only happen with a very exact burst of electromagnetic radiation from the body itself. And there's more proof for the shroud being real than most people know. Riddles of the shroud list, 99 pieces of proof supporting its truth. This proof includes tiny bits of the shroud of very rare soil found in Jerusalem and tiny bits of flower pollen from Jerusalem. There is also proof from chemicals in the blood on the cloth showing it has a lot of bilirubin. This fits with a body that's gone through some kind of torture. But that's not even the best part, and you may want to pay special attention now. Dr. Michael Tite, who led the carbon dating, says that he now thinks the cloth wasn't made by a forger in the Middle Ages, as the carbon data said in 1988. Dr. Tite said in an interview that he thinks the proof shows there really was a body in the cloth. He guesses the man on the shroud might have been a Christian crusader who was crucified as a way of making fun by Muslim troops. But this idea doesn't match the proof showing a supernatural event, not a natural one. Still, Dr. Tite's comments are important because he admits the shroud wasn't faked up by a forger, like the carbon data is claimed in 1988. Proof for the shroud being real also comes from the forensic pathologists who say the shroud shows details about the body that people in the Middle Ages didn't know. The shroud supports all the details of the gospel story about Jesus' death and coming back to life. Now, did you know that according to the gospel story, the first person to believe in Jesus' coming back to life was the Apostle John? He went into the tomb, looked at the empty shroud, and believed that the coming back to life really happened. As John's story in his own gospel says, he saw and he believed. The shroud gives strong proof for the coming back to life, a proof so strong that it should convince any well-taught jury without a doubt that the shroud is real and that the coming back to life really happened. And as for doubters, they will be here till the end of time, exerting considerable effort to convince others that none of these events ever occurred. Is the Bible really complete? Or could there be hidden truths that were intentionally removed from the sacred book? 90% of the Old Testament's been removed, and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. The Book of Judith, which has sparked vast conspiracy theories and intense debates for ages, was banned from the Bible for its shocking revelation about humans. Despite its thorough studies that give additional insights on events in Judith's day and show valor, as well as its references to God, the book has no place in the current Christian Bible due to its nature and material on seduction. Many scholars do not believe it was divinely inspired, but they say it's more of a disagreeable fact. So what could have possibly been written in the pages of the Book of Judith? How controversial are the contents, and why are the scholars not supporting the written facts? The Book of Judith is a deuterocanonical book included in the Septuagint and the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christian Old Testament of the Bible, but excluded from the Hebrew canon and assigned by Protestants to the Apocrypha. It depicts the story of Judith, a Jewish widow who uses her beauty and seduction to assassinate an Assyrian general who has besieged Bethulia. With this deed, she rescues nearby Jerusalem from complete destruction. It is unclear if the Book of Judith was originally written in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, as the oldest known form comes from the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. However, given the vast number of Hebraisms in the text, it is widely assumed that the book was composed of a Semitic language rather than Greek. So the story revolves around Judith, a daring and beautiful widow who is upset with her Jewish countrymen for not trusting God to deliver them from their foreign conquerors. She goes with her loyal maid to the camp of the enemy General Holofernes, with whom she slowly ingratiates herself, promising him information on the Israelites. Gaining his trust, she is allowed access to his tent one night as he lies in a drunken stupor. She decapitates him, then takes his head back to her fearful countrymen. The Assyrians, having lost their leader, disperse, and Israel is saved. Though she is courted by many, Judith remains unmarried for the rest of her life. The Book of Judith can be split into two parts or acts of approximately equal length. Chapters 1 to 7 describe the rise of the threat to Israel, led by the evil king Nebuchadnezzar and his sycophantic leader Holofernes, and is concluded as Holofernes' worldwide campaign has converged at the mountain pass where Judith's village, Bethulia, is located. Chapters 8 to 16. Then introduce Judith and depict her heroic actions to save her people. The first part, although at times tedious in its description of the military developments, develops important themes by alternating battles with reflections and rousing action with rest. In contrast, the second half is devoted mainly to Judith's strength of character and the beheading scene. Judith, the heroine of the book, is a God-fearing woman, the daughter of Merari, a Simeonite, and the widow of a wealthy farmer named Manasseh, or Manasseh. She sends her maid or waiting woman to Uzziah to dispute his choice to yield to the Assyrians if God does not save the people of Bethulia within 5 days, and she uses her seduction to become an intimate friend of Holofernes before beheading him, allowing Israel to counterattack the Assyrians. Judith's maid, who is not identified in the text, follows her throughout the story and is released at the end. Holofernes, the book's villain, is a devoted soldier of his king and the general-in-chief of his army, whom he wishes to see glorified across the world. He is tasked with killing the rebels, who do not assist the king of Nineveh's resistance against Chilade and the king of Media, until Israel becomes the focus of his military operation. Judith's bravery and charm were responsible for his death, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Nineveh and Assyria, who is so proud that he wants to affirm his strength as a sort of divine power, although Holofernes, his Turton, the commanding general, goes beyond the king's orders when he calls on the Western nations to worship only Nebuchadnezzar and invoke him as a god. Holofernes is told to take revenge on individuals who refuse to join forces with Nebuchadnezzar. Akur, an Ammonite leader in Nebuchadnezzar's court, recalls Israel's history and warns the king of Assyria about the strength of their god, the God of heaven, but is mocked. He is protected by the Bethulians, converts to Judaism, and is criticized after learning of Judith's accomplishments. Bagwaz, or Vagau, known as Vulgate, the eunuch who had charge over Holofernes' personal affairs, his name is Persian for a eunuch. He brought in Judith to recline with Holofernes and was the first one who discovered his beheading. Uzziah, or Uzziah, governor of Bethulia, together with Kabri and Kami, rules over Judith's city. When the city is besieged by the Assyrians and the water supply dries up, he agrees to the people's call to surrender. If God has not rescued them within 5 days, a decision challenged has rash by Judith. Now, why is this book not included in the Bible? Aside from Judith, another biblical heroine protects the people of Israel through an encounter with the royals. She is known as Esther and has a book by that name. Esther and Judith were both hailed as heroines, and while their daring deeds were carried out in very different ways, their stories were quite identical. But the interesting question is, why did Esther make it to the Bible and Judith not? Interestingly, Esther almost did not make it into the canon. The book of Esther stands out from the rest of the Bible because it's the only one that has not mentioned God. God is not mentioned once in the book, so when it came to adopting it, the rabbis were divided, but popularity eventually won out, and it was accepted. And the twist is, Judith is rejected even though the main character is devoted to worshiping God, and the book ends with her singing a song of praise as she credits God with a victory. Then why only accept the book of Esther? In the end, everything comes down to historicity. Although there are serious uncertainties about whether the events depicted in Esther occurred, there is little evidence to contradict the account. On the other hand, most scholars have long considered Judith's story to be a work of historical fiction, despite the fact that many think she was an actual historical woman. The authenticity of the rest of the text is called into question, although the author carefully sets the scene by dating Nabucodonosor's rule in Assyria to 605 BCE. Furthermore, the city of Bethulia does not appear to have ever been, and while the author clearly locates the city geographically, there is no archaeological evidence or indication of any habitation at that spot. In addition, the book used a combination of Babylonian, Greek, and Persian names, some of which were only used in this area. Hundreds of decades later, there are simply too many alternative ancient man manuscripts of the Book of Judith, and all but a few do not conform. However, when the process of canonizing the scriptures began, the question of history had a significant part in determining what would be acknowledged as Holy Scripture. Judith's book apparently did not pass due to its numerous flaws. However, the book was so popular that it was given special consideration and included in the Apocrypha disputes. If religious works are exceedingly controversial, then the Book of Judith undoubtedly belongs in that category. Many of the book's passages contradict historic and contemporary Christian doctrines, prompting criticism. One of the most contentious issues surrounding the book is Judith's lying. She is most likely the only person in Bible history to have explicitly requested God for assistance in dealing with her dishonesty. According to the narratives, Judith is the only biblical woman who requests God to help her become a good liar. This is plainly demonstrated in Judith chapter 9, verse 10 and 9, verse 13, where she begs God to grant her deceitful words that will be successful against those who have planned cruelties against Jerusalem temple and their homeland, Bethulia, and by extension, Israel. It's not surprising that the book did not make it into the modern-day Bible, and based on its contents, the explanation is not far-fetched. It stems from a series of conflicts with the Bible, ranging from invented names and locations to entirely odd references. The problems begin straight at the opening of the book, in the first line of the first chapter, which says, "It was the 12th century year of the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled the Assyrians in the great city of Nineveh. In those days, Etched governed the Medes of Ecbatana. Readers and critics can notice a major issue with the Book of Judith right away, a big conflict with other biblical texts. First and foremost, the Bible states that Nebuchadnezzar was never an Assyrian and never ruled over that area. There was no relationship between them. According to the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar was the sovereign king of Babylon and a world ruler at the time. Again, according to the Book of Judith, Nebuchadnezzar lives in Nineveh. This is equally as controversial and conflicting as Nebuchadnezzar himself. Most of the names of people are either unknown to history or appear to be anachronistic, and many of the place names are also unknown. The Catholic Church has always considered the book to be a historical document and is included with other historical books in the Old Testament of the Catholic Bibles. For this reason, there have been various attempts by both scholars and clergy to understand the characters and the events in the book as either an allegorical representation of actual events or a historical document that has been altered or translated improperly. The practice of changing names has been observed in documents from the Second Temple period, such as the Damascus document, which apparently contains references to an uncertain location referred to by the pseudonym of Tamaskis. The writings of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus also frequently differ from the biblical record regarding the names of the high priests of Israel. Elsewhere in the Bible, there are also names of rulers that are unknown to history, such as Darius, the Medi from the book of Daniel, or Ahasuerus from the book of Esther. The large size of the Assyrian army and the large size of the Median walls in the book have also been criticized, but both of these have been attested elsewhere in the Bible and in secular historical records. The Assyrian army that besieged Jerusalem in 2 Kings was said to have been 185,000 strong, a number several tens of thousands larger than the Assyrian army described in the book of Judith. The book is widely rejected by Protestants who refuse to acknowledge it as part of the Bible. However, the rejection of the book is not unanimous. It was approved as part of the Scriptures by the councils of Rome, Hippo, Carthage, and Florence, before being defined and deemed canonical by the Roman Catholic Church in 1546 at the Council of Trent. In 1672, the Eastern Orthodox Church acknowledged Judith as inspired scripture, which was ratified in Jerusalem. So the book is part of the Catholic Church's canon. Judith is a patron saint of Catholics in Prussia and Germany. In Roman Catholicism, the Book of Judith and its primary figure by that name are held in high regard. In terms of importance, Judith is one of the most powerful women in the Old Testament, and she demonstrates that she is a lady of trust, setting a fantastic example for Christians today.